So I'll get all my apologies out the way at the start. I put this together mostly yesterday, a little bit this morning. Haven't actually practiced it. It's probably about 2 hours of material I'm going to try and pack into an hour. I've warned before, I speak quickly. I actively want heckling, so, you know, I know a few people here. There you go, more of that. Yeah, fuck off, you shits. Anyway, so what this is going to be is I've taught a few people Houdini at the school and in various places in production. Most people tend to come from a Maya background, so this is a little collection of tips. I think it's about 23 tips in total of little mistakes people make when they're first learning Houdini, coming from a Maya background. And there's some fun alt titles. Hooray. So, spreadsheet versus outline. This is probably the biggest one that people kind of mistake. So here is a screenshot of the, sorry, mistake. Screenshot of the Maya outliner. This is how sort of people from Maya tend to look at the world. So you've got a hierarchy, things are parented beneath things. That's how they work. You can do that in inside Houdini. So I've got a little demo here. So I've got some stuff. Things are parented beneath things. So if I move, say, this sphere, because the squab is parented to the sphere, if I rotate that, they rotate together. If I rotate the top null, it all moves as well. The problem is within Houdini, this isn't very Houdini-esque. Where Houdini kind of excels is more about treating the scene like it's all combined together and you're just writing your own sort of custom Maya deformers. So really, within a context of Houdini, what you would probably do is, if I dive inside here, I would probably merge it all together. So what this node does, this object merge, is I can say, find everything up at that top level and bring it down here, but I can also say, but don't bring in this node itself, because then you'd have an infinite loop and things go crazy, and don't bring in this other thing that I'm going to show later. Once you do that, you no longer have this outliner view of the world, but you have this spreadsheet view of the world. Houdini is spreadsheets. That's probably the simplest way to kind of get a handle on how to think about Houdini. It's a spreadsheet. So here you can see I've got a spreadsheet. I've got things numbered 0 to 5. I've got those original paths as they came in from say, Maya, if I was printing that these were from Maya, and I can do operations here. So I could then unpack these. I could apply silly deformers. I could run particle sims. I could do whatever I want. This also works not just for this sort of contrived example, but also from, if I actually were to generate a scene from Maya and I was to pull it in through an alembic, I can treat it in a similar way. So I can either bring it in exactly as it would be inside Maya, where I get this whole kind of hierarchy worldview. People tend to fall on this by default and very quickly go, this doesn't feel right, what's wrong? And the reason is, if I want to do operations here, I'd have to dive into each node separately and do a thing. That's boring. There is another way to bring in alembic geometry, which is down here at the SOPs context, and you have this node which will bring in an alembic, and I bring in all the same stuff, but I still have all of those properties. So I've got all the path information, any material assignments will still be tracked through. Really, really powerful way to work. Start to think like this. So less outline and more this. If you really want an outliner, it does exist inside Maya, inside Houdini. I only found this yesterday. If you hold down Shift-T, and you get this sort of Maya-y outliner view, and there's a way to make it look very Maya outlinery if I just do that and that. So if if with Shift-T and you right-click and go Input-Output, you get this sort of a hierarchy view. Now that you know, don't do that. Let's go back in. 4 minutes, oh my God, I'm already miles over time. Points versus particles and attributes versus my vertex colors. A big thing for my people transitioning over to Houdini is people talk about points all the time. Points, points, points. What the hell, what's the difference? This is probably the cleanest way that I could think to demonstrate that. So here is, this is a slippery table. So here is, come down, here's a pig. Show pig. And you can see that that's made up of polygons and edges and points and stuff, vertices, sorry, in Maya land. Now, what I could do is, my people are familiar with particles, because you get particles inside Maya, and there are a few tools in Maya that you can convert an object into a particle system, like with soft bodies. So if I were to do this, so I've basically deleted all the polygons, and wherever there was a vertex here, I've basically replaced that with a point, with a particle. So that's still probably understandable for Maya folk. In a similar way to Maya folk, I could then apply per particle attributes using this little bit of code here where I'm saying the color of each particle is a random color. Okay? So that's that. That'll kind of make sense from a binary worldview. The big difference is that you don't have to remove things or convert them back into particles to be able to do those sort of operations. You can do that whenever you want. So if I turn off this thing which is converting these things from geometry to points, I get the same effect. The big difference with, say, Maya is Maya treats vertices of a polygon as I guess kind of the smallest atomic unit of a polygon. It treats particles as their own smallest atomic unit. The control vertices on a curve, their own thing. But ultimately, they're all just basically points in space. Whereas Maya kind of limits you into saying that this is a kind of atom, that's a kind of atom, that's a kind of atom. Houdini says, I don't care, they're all just points. And you can create them or destroy them or mess around with them as you want. Another similar way to think about it, which does have a strong Maya analogy, is people do use, say, vertex coloring sometimes to do things in Maya. So say, for example, this was going to be handed out to render and you wanted some simple RGB mats. Well, you might say make the entire head red, you might color the ears blue, and you might make the snout green. And then when you render, you get ID mats for that. Another way to do that, or another way to think about how this is sort of limiting, is you are kind of hijacking color to do data, to do stuff. So ultimately, these colors are being used for say grading mats or something. But you know that if you do sort of more colors in this, you start to run into issues because colors will start to mix funny. You can't isolate this particular shade of pink from that shade of pink. It all gets unwieldy quite quickly. What if? Imagine we were in a world where rather than using colors, you could have your own arbitrary data flowing through on your shapes. That's Houdini, that's what it does. So here instead, casting an eye over here at the spreadsheet, I can see that for every point, I've got this color value, so I've got a red, green, and blue. But let's skip that and let's go over to this one instead, where what I'm doing is I'm saying for all these polygons, so what I've done here is I've used this little selector tool and I've gone and I've just highlighted the ears like that. And then I'm saying for that selection, give me a new column in my spreadsheet called ears, and for only those polygons, only for those points, make that value be 1. So if I look here, you can see that all those ones have 1 and the rest all have 0. And I can do the same for the snout, and I can do the same for the face. So I've done different selections for each thing. Once I've got that, and I've got this data sitting on the shape ready to do stuff, I can do all kinds of fun operations. So for example, I could use selections in the viewport where I can have it show me attributes. So I can go to, this is on the primitives. Yep, primitives. Sorry, so I should have practiced this. So we go here and go attributes, ears. I can see that this is now letting me choose where the ears are, or I can choose where the face is, or where the snout is. And that's not just for selection, but that's for almost any kind of operation that you'd want to do in Maya. So say inside Houdini. So say you want to subdivide only the nose, or you want to move it in some weird sine wave format, or you want to generate particles only on the ears. You've got that sort of control in here. It's really powerful. So this idea that Maya has a bit of a sense of being able to apply arbitrary data onto your shapes, Houdini is built on that. Really powerful. Number 4, context diving. Probably the biggest difference about Houdini versus Maya is that Maya, kind of whatever your sort of primary scene view is, that's what it is. Houdini can get a little baroque. So say, for example, I've got this thing, it says dive inside me. I go, oh, okay. So I dive inside there. Oh, I've got some more nodes. So here I've got a box, which I'm subdividing, applying this mountain deformer to it, choose, there we are, and applying a material. But where's that material coming from? Okay, so if I look at the properties, parameters for this node, I can see that it's referring to a material down in obj preso dive inside RopNet1. Oh, that's RopNet1. What's in there? Double click. Oh, I've got more things. I've got 3 more mantra nodes, and oh, I've got a material network. What's in there? You can dive inside there forever. Houdini doesn't restrict you from making horrible Gordian knot labyrinthine nightmares of stuff. It's designed to give you control, so that if you want to be nice and organized, you can do it. If you want to make your fellow artist furious with anger, feel free to do this. Don't do that. That's bad. So now I'm hitting U to go up. So I'm coming up through these networks back to the very top. Even at a base level, there is a certain amount of diving into and out of things that for my people can be a little bit confusing. You get used to it. 5, template versus display. So this is another simple one. So here is a box, and I am poly extruding that out into a thing. Over here I've got a sphere, and I'm booleaning them together, and here is my end result. So that's all fine. But say I want to twiddle the parameters of the poly extrude while I'm looking at the boolean. How do I do that? Well, normally when you first start out, you kind of know that, okay, it's this blue flag at the end, so if I click that, I can go back and look at the box, I can select it, make a tweak, then I can go back down to the output, look at that. But ideally you want to see both at the same time. That's what template flags are for. So next to the blue one, you have this little pinky one, and if you click that, it gives you a little wireframe preview of that node. So this way now, I can be looking at the output while I'm changing this one. That's all it is. You see a couple of people, even a few sort of long-term users, that for some reason learned back in the dawn of time that when they're moving around stuff, that they have to click both those things at the same time. Don't do that. It's not needed. So if you happen to have a pink flag anywhere, which is showing you a wireframe overlay and the actual geometry, you can click it again and it goes away and everyone's happy. Let's go to attributes at different levels. Yeah, this is a good one. So here again, I've got a pig, and I've just tidied up the attribute spreadsheet so it's nice and clean. So in the attribute spreadsheet, sorry, in the geometry spreadsheet, it's now called, I've got points. So what this is showing me is for every single vertex here, every point, it's telling me where it is in space. So if I were to turn on numbers, for example, I can see that point, let's find a better one. Where's 0 in this thing? Okay, so point 121 up there. Points. 121, I can go down and find that one. And that is sitting at position 0.0 or something on X, 0.02 on Y, and 1.25 on Z. And I've got no other attributes sitting on this thing just yet. What I could do is I could use this color point stop to add random colors to the points. And so you can see here I've got more columns in my spreadsheet now, and I can see random colors in the viewport. Now what I could also do is I've got these other spreadsheet views. So that's points. This middle one here is vertices, where it's storing UV information. And over here are the primitives, which are the actual polygons themselves. Now what I could also do is, for this color points node, so this is running in point mode, but I could also choose to run it on the primitives, which are the polygons themselves. And you can see that this has a slightly different view. So rather than having a color which is sitting in the middle of that point and it's being sort of blended between them, I'm setting every polygon's color itself. The other thing you can do is you can move attributes from one level to another level. So looking back at this points one, and you can see I've got these sort of blended colors again. I could promote the colors from this level, which is the points level, up to the primitives. So if I go to the attribute promote, and I say I'm going to promote the color, CD, from point to primitive, I now see this. And you can see that it's now gone this slightly sort of kind of more pastel-y tone. And the reason is you also get to tell it how it will promote those values. So the default promotion method is to average it, or it could go the maximum one, which would be brighter colors generally, or the minimum, so it's darker colors, or any one of these other fun things. Realizing that attributes in these spreadsheets ultimately it's just data. It's just mutable. You can move it from one level to another. You can modify it. You can copy stuff from here to there and pull it around again. Once you get a sense of how that works, that's when you start to sort of move away from that sort of Maya, here's a cube, I'm going to parent beneath a sphere, and here's a camera thing, to just saying, oh, I'm just going to manipulate my scene to do what I want. This connection between points to verts to prims can be a little bit obtuse. If you Google for CityWiki points, verts, prims, I've got a few animated GIFs to help explain that. Sorry. Tab menus. So if I want to make a node inside Houdini, you can hit tab, you get a big menu. If I know the name of the thing I'm after, like say a pig, or a box probably, I can start typing BOX. Oops. And there's a box, and I can choose it, and then I place it down, and then I look at it, and then I view it. So there it is. The other thing you can do is if you know that a particular node you're after has multiple words in its name, like say a polyextrude, you can hit tab and you can start typing the first letter of each word. So rather than typing P-O-L-Y-E-X-T-R like that, I could just type P-E, and it now finds me all the nodes that have P-E in the name. You can start to be pretty loosey-goosey with this. So I know, well, polyextrude, P-E-X probably would work. So if I do P-E-X, then it will limit down to just those. It's a much faster way to get around. If you see kind of experienced Houdini folk and they're dancing around, putting down nodes, like they're sort of viewing the matrix encoded, that's their trick. They're just typing the first letters of nodes. Now, where you actually press your tab menu will do slightly different things, which can be quite useful. So say here I've got a pig, and I want to split off the ear to do something else. So what I could do is I could tab in a split node, put it down, wire it in, make sure that I'm viewing this node, use the selection over here, choose some things, hit enter to confirm the selection, and I've done all that. So that's a perfectly valid way to work. But the other thing you can do is if I do that whole operation but in the viewport, so if I select first, and if I hit tab and then split, watch what this does. So it does a bunch of those operations all at once for you. So it will pre-fill out the group, it will make the node, it will put it down, and it will reconnect it, and it will also move the display down to there. Really, really handy. I don't have time. That's fine. Yes, okay, so this is a bit of a religious debate between sort of people who use Houdini for a bit. This is how I do Houdini, so this is, of course, the right way to do Houdini, which is start from the top, do some stuff. Sorry? Did I skip number 9? Shift enter. No, I did not, thank you. Good point. Good, powerful heckle. So the other quick tip is similar to how when I use tab in the viewport and it will and it put the node down for me, reconnected and moved the display flag so I could see it. You can also do that inside the regular network editors. So if I do a subdivide down here and I hold down Shift Enter rather than going and clicking and choosing on it, it does the same thing. So it puts the node down, connects it up, moves the flag. Nice, handy, fast way to work. Now to the right way to do Houdini. So when I do Houdini, when I do setups, I tend to work this way, where so this setup is a thing that I posted recently about doing a sort of a GUI cookie simulation. And so what I'll do is I say, okay, well, here's a thing, and I'm going to polybevel the edges. I'm going to set up a cutting plane, I'm going to rough it up a bit, I'm going to boolean them out together, and I'm going to do stuff. And then I'm going to start to prep things for simulation. So this is setting up some vellum things, doing some more vellum things. Then eventually I get down to my solver, then I'm doing some post-solver work, and then it's the output. All in one flow. Others, wrong people, do it another way, where they will make use of the fact that Houdini lets you compartmentalize. So they will work this way. So I'm just going to hide that for a sec. So you'll often see things like say this. So they'll have, say, 3 high-level nodes called, like, say, prep, sim, and post-process. So in here, in the prep node, it's basically just what I did before. So there's a tube, polybevel, cut, bevel, all that jazz, and it'll end in something called, like, say, out model. Then if you jump up to the next node, the sim node, this has an object merge node, which is pulling in the result of that last location. And it does all of its solver setup stuff, it runs the solver, and the end result is a node called out simulation. Then you go into this other node, post-process, which takes the result of that, does what it needs to do, and outputs it. Both are valid. So oftentimes, if you look at a single node network, like this one, and this is starting to run to like 3 or 4 kilometers straight down, then it's probably time to start to break it up. Otherwise, people are going to look at it and just have nosebleeds and horror at the size of that thing. You want to be, I prefer a single clean node setup like this, which I can follow from top to bottom, versus having to dive around into different contexts and try to keep track, hang on, was I coming from that node or from that node, and which was the other subcontainer? unless I don't, in which case it can be quite useful to compartmentalize. Just don't go too crazy with the compartmentalization, I find. Right, 11. Network boxes, don't use them. That's my bottom line. So network boxes are these things. So you can make some nodes. So if I drag these ones out, for exec, you can choose them, make a network box, and you get this nice little helper things just for scene organization. You can color them, you can minimize and maximize them. Every time someone tries to use these things around me, they end up causing pain and dismay. Things like if you happen to make a new node, it will sometimes be in the node network, sometimes it won't be. So if I do that, that seems to be inside the node network, but what happens if I move them all? Oh, that does work. How about this one? No, that didn't work. Can I drag it back in there? Let's see. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. It infuriates me. It makes me very, 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 very angry. Whereas I find this way of just coloring like nodes together with a similarly colored post note by the side, that to me is much more clear and it's much more edit friendly, I find, than network boxes. We're up to HAs versus references. This one I debated putting in and out, but it was on the blurb for the talk, so I had to do it. So this is a screenshot of the reference editor inside Maya. And this is a pretty kind of standard setup that people would have, where you would have separate reference nodes for the set, the characters, the props, and the camera. When people start to use Houdini a bit and using an anger, they start to say, well, where's the reference editor? How do I start merging hips together? And the answer is, well, you don't really. And they go, but really, I need my reference editor. And you go, it's not that. Here is kind of a representation of how you could work in a more modular way. So here, I've got a little dummy shot set up. So there's a character with some props and a room. So if I dive inside the set node, here I've got a room and a table which has been merged together. If I go to the character, I've got a character with some stuff. But over here, this is me starting to modularize this setup. So over here, I've got a prop which is pulling in a teapot and doing some stuff. But you can see it has this little lock icon on it, which is a clue that this is an HDA, a Houdini digital asset. So there's there's loads of talks about that, loads of videos online, but ultimately what it is a way that you can take a bunch of nodes and you can save it on disk somewhere else away from your HIP file. So this prop node, I was half tempted to try and make one live, but I think that's a terrible thing to try. So when I right-click on something and go create digital asset, and I say, okay, what do you want to name this? What do you want to name this thing, and where do you want to save it? And by default, this goes into my home folder, OTLs, and it'll be called something.hda. And this is HANC because this is the educational copy. And if I go over to that location, you can see I've got this prop.HANC. What that does, among other things, is it now makes that bunch of nodes available from my tab menu. So if I type prop, I can now put down that prop. This has a few advantages apart from just saying, oh, here's a nice little node reuse thing. What this can also do is rather than just saving it into my home folder, that could be a location on the network. So I could have another artist, say a layout artist, open up their own Houdini session, like this one here. They could put down a prop asset, a prop HDA, and then they can edit this. They can make changes. So if they want to improve this for some reason, so they can go allow editing of this node, dive inside, change that to, say, a soccer ball, and then they go save node type, match it to show that that's now kind of what this thing should be. Meanwhile, back on my side, as soon as that gets updated, I see the change happen here. So this is a way to get that kind of referencey style workflow where I've got now separate files that can be on my network. One person can be working on the file over here, and I see the changes here. You can get very tricky with this. A big advantage of this thing over, say, my references is that's it. You pull in a file, you can change the reference to the file, that's kind of it. With an HDA, I could, if I chose to, expose some of these properties. So say this drop-down box to choose what kind of platonic solid this is. I could have that sitting up here on the top of this node. I could have it be reactive to environment variables in my scene, so that if I was running through, say, shotgun, and I had a variable $shot, I could have it say, recognize that I'm in this shot context, therefore load this thing, but if I'm in another shot context, load something else. You can be very malleable with this workflow. There's a really nice Python API to go around HDAs, so that you can also encapsulate that level of editing and versioning and control for the artist, so that anyone can say, oh, I just want to make this change, twiddle it, and then they can, from a right-click menu, check that back into the main studio-wide repository of HDAs. Really, really powerful. It goes well beyond what standard Maya referencing can do. The one thing that I should probably say that it doesn't do quite well is cameras and other stuff. You do run into sort of issues where this is a container down at this, like, I guess, like sort of geometry modification level in SOPs. Cameras live up at the OBJ level, up in this level up here. Lights as well. That can mean that if you're trying to sort of manage low-level nodes combining with high-level nodes, like say cameras and lights, it can get a little bit awkward, unless you have some newfangled thing like, say, Solaris and Lops, which is going to come very soon, and it's going to solve a lot of these kind of issues for being able to layer both low-level geometry operations and high-level things like cameras and transforms and stuff, and bung it all together. Really, really cool. We're up to 15, attribute versus maps. Okay. So this is another one where you can take people who have used Maya a little bit of time to get used to. So here is the default pig. This time I've turned on the pig's default material, and you can see that it has a texture map. And if I look in closely, you can see that it's got a reasonable amount of detail, creases and curves and stuff. But people can be a little bit confused at first to go, okay, but I can see that it's pink, but there's no color information down here on the points. And if I look at the UVs, at the vertices, I can see that that's got UVs, and up at the primitive level, I've got some other stuff. So there's this mystery-looking shop material path, but the color isn't being saved anywhere. What is going on here? The answer is this is doing a trick where it's basically applying a viewport shader, referencing a texture which lives inside the HDA to say this is where this thing lives. Hello. Oh, okay. Is that better? Have I just been muttering this whole time and you've not heard what I said? I asked for the heckles. So that's basically what it's doing. This is doing a sort of a viewport time texture mapping, but it's not actually doing anything to the geometry itself. Sometimes people ask, well, how do I do that? Well, another way is like this. So here I've got the pig, but this time without that default shader mapping. So that's just by turning off this add shader button. And there is this other function called attribute from map. So what this one does is this will reference a texture which I specify. So this is actually coming from inside that particular HDA. And it's now copying those color values onto the points. So now you can see I've got these color columns, and it looks pinky. But you can see that the quality is pretty ropey. It looks quite low res and blurry, and that's because you can literally only copy the color at those point locations, and in between it's just being blended together. If I want to get a more accurate color, I'd have to give it more points to work with. So I might put down a subdivide, put that in the middle. Whoops! Oh dear! Oh god, what have I done? There we are. So now I've got a bit more accurate color transfer. I can try and push the subdivide up a bit more, like that. And now you can start to see I'm getting more of that color through. That sense of data flowing on the geometry itself, again, that's a thing you have to sort of try and remind yourself when you're transitioning over from Maya into Houdini. That's a handy trick. What else we got? Manual layout versus smug layouts. Okay, so let's say here I've got a shape and I'm using a copy sort to make lots of copies for it. Say you want to lay these all out. Well, one way is you could do the Maya way, and I could put down an edit sop, which is just like sort of a manual poly tweaking operation. And I could go and choose a thing, hit transform and move it. And I could grab, select again, just like that, move it. And that kind of works, but what if the number of inputs change? What if the actual shapes themselves change? There's got to be a better way of doing it. what you start to get into is this self-destructive cycle where almost every problem, you don't just go immediately for the fastest solution. You go, what is the most elegant, smug solution that I could do for this particular thing? Here is my elegant, smug solution for this particular thing. So Houdini has this node called the connectivity SOP. And what this does is this will identify contiguous islands of geometry and will give them a shared ID called class. So here you can see that the first points, 0 to 3, they'll have a class of 0. Next one's class of 1, 2, 3, 4. Then what I can do is using that particular column of data, I can move the points based on that attribute. So I might do a wrangle, because there's nothing more smug than using a wrangle. And I might go, I'm going to add to the X position that class. Oops. So now you can see that for the first point, for the first tetrahedron, is that a tetrahedron? Let's say yes. Yes, it is. So for the first tetrahedron, its class attribute is 0, therefore that doesn't get moved. The next one is 1, so that gets moved 1 unit, 2 units, 3 units, 4 units. That's not bad, but they're all a bit sort of overlappy. How would you fix that? Well, if I were to multiply class by some factor, say by say 2, then they all move twice as far, or if I times by 0.5, then they move half as far. I could do better than that. So for peak smugness, I could make my own slider called offset, like that. And then I click a button to make the slider, and now I've got this thing that I can do that. Now the advantage there is that now, no matter if I change the shape, or if I change the number of copies, it does the right thing. Smug. Sorry? Probably terrible. Let's have a look. Yeah, there we go. See, kids, don't let friends use edit stops. Avoiding sim where possible. So this is another one where Houdini being known for being the tool to do explosions and stuff. And once you get into a bit of using kind of DOPNets and sims and Pyre and stuff, it's very tempting to approach everything as a simulation problem. I learnt at the feet of the amazing Matt Ebb, who was one of the first to kind of point out saying, yeah, but if you can avoid it, just always kind of think about the problem you're trying to solve and say, is there a way that I can avoid simulation here? I think your words were something like, if you could brute force keyframe this particular thing, there's probably a way to approach it in more of a in more of a procedural approach. So this was the best demo that I could think of at 1 AM last night, where growth systems are really popular. All the kids are doing it. And everyone is using some combination of a solver SOP and volumes, and you're doing near points and stuff. Or don't. So a fun trick is, here's a grid. I'm using a remesh to make lots of small triangles. And find shortest path is one of the coolest nodes within Houdini, where basically you can tell it from this start location or from a bunch of start locations, try and generate paths across the surface to this bunch of other known end locations. So what I could do is I could say find point 0 and find paths through to every other point on this mesh. Just looks like that, which is pretty cool. You've also got a smooth node, which will just give me nice soft paths. And then you've got a carve SOP. And what a carve does is it just literally sort of carves off lengths from a curve. So if I use this carve SOP now, there's a few down here, and I can just slide through where that's carving, and I get something that looks, not too far away from one of these groovy sort of growthy solver things that people do, but there's no simulation. So I can jump to any given frame, and that's totally fine. I can change the inputs. I didn't do this before, it's probably a bit risky. Yeah, I can change the size of my mesh, and it all updates live. Of course you need sim. Of course there's going to be times where you do it, but it's really fun. And again, referencing the point earlier, for maximum smug points, if you can do a really cool effect that doesn't require simulation, Lord's your oyster. We're up to 16. Time dependency. So here is a box. It's being run through a mountain SOP where I've animated its time parameter. So that's all wibbly wobbly. I'm then poly extruding every face, and I'm subdividing it to get this kind of wibbly wobbly thing. So it's doing stuff, but performance is a little bit ropey. Why is that? If you look at the nodes, you can see this little clock icon. that clock icon tells you that this is being evaluated every frame. So if I jump a frame, this wants to get a result, but it says, well, I can't cook until this one cooks. That's saying, well, I can't cook until this one cooks. That one cooks, passes that result to that, passes that result to that. If you do a lot of these kind of operations, and when you're sort of first doing Houdini, you tend to work in this sort of very sort of top to bottom fashion, and performance will suffer. Once you're aware of this little clock icon, and once you're aware of ways that you can manipulate time within Houdini, you can do some really cool tricks. One of them, so this is a bit of a rewire of that first setup. So here I've got the box running to a mountain stop, but then over here, I'm basically freezing time. So I'm saying with this node, lock on to frame 1 and don't move. And so here you can see that while this one has the time icon, this one, it's gone. So now I can jump around here and you can see Houdini is all quick and zippy again. So I can do the same operations as I did before. So poly extrude, subdivide. So now I've got this static mesh. It's just sitting there and it's not having to recalculate every frame. And then I'm using a point deform here where I'm saying, okay, take this static mesh and using that as a reference compared to this moving one, deform this guy. So now I've got this shape. It isn't quite like the first one, and if I'd given it more time and thought, I probably could have got exactly there. But you can see that basically now, rather than cooking 4 nodes every frame, I'm only cooking 2 nodes every frame. So that little trick, and especially once you come up with a nice setup, it's good to take a step back and look at it and go, okay, which part of these of this whole flow has to update every frame, and which ones can just be run once in the first frame and then just be updated right at the very end. Really powerful trick, that one. Again, thanks to Matt Ed. 17, use multiple packages. People tend to get in this very sort of all or nothing mode. Who's calling me from Brisbane, Queensland? How dare you? Is this a heckle? People tend to get very sort of caught up in this idea of, you know, I've got to drop everything that is to know and just dive into using Houdini, and I've got a rig and, you know, surfacing and blah. You don't have to. One of the biggest advantages about Houdini is that it plays really nice with others. So with the way that it can bring in alembics, and it can write out alembics, it can bring in FBXs, it can bring in OBJs, it can all be very modular so that you can just update file reference to point from, say, version 5 to version 6, and the rest of your network just updates. You can be as atomic or as all-in as you want to be with Houdini. This is a little kind of a pipeline diagram, which I made inside Houdini because I'm a pathetic nerd, of how we do stuff at the Animalogic Academy. And you can see that you know, we've got sort of, you know, Photoshop for storyboards, and then it goes through Shotgun, and then we're using Maya for doing lots of our set layout, and ZBrush, and this and the other, Substance for surfacing. But then we come into Houdini down here for doing char effects and effects. We're starting to roll back into some layout tricks as well. It can be inserted just where you want it to be, and when you get confidence in it, you can then sort of expand it out in either direction as much or as little as you want. It's not a holy wall. You can be very piecemeal with it, which is really, really powerful. What else we got? Yeah, people tend to look at the whole sort of node graph within Houdini and you know, get sort of the swoons and go, oh my god, it's all so complicated. There was a great post by Stu Maschwitz, who runs the Prolost website, where he was comparing Nuke to After Effects. And it's a similar analogy here, that if you come from the kind of paradigm where you don't have a node view, you look at nodes and panic. But once you get used to it, you realize that it's actually, it almost maps better onto our brains and the way that we think of a process. So that by now you kind of see how this thing has been running. If I wanted to dive back to a given node, I can look at this thing from a high-level view and go, oh, okay, if I wanted to look at that whole kind of vellum cloth sort of cookie setup, I know that it's there because I know what that looks like. You start to get a sense of spatial awareness of your workflow, tying together this 2D map and processes in a way that when you try and debug my setups, where they don't give you this sort of like kind of clean, editable, tidyable node-based workflow, it can be quite traumatic to do. Even to the point where if I want to now go back to where I was, I made myself, oh, here's a little helper arrow. I can go right back there. You can get a little sort of maybe icon in the corner, an so an overview with O to show you where you are. Don't be afraid of the nodes. They're good for you. Too much vex. So this is another trap for the younger players where here is a grid, and I'm going to do some stuff where I'm going to randomize the color, and I want to randomize the velocity, and I want to randomize the normals. I fell into this trap where you go, oh, that's simple. I'm just going to write myself a sweet wrangle that's going to do all this kind of stuff, and it's got fit functions and blah, 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 and oh, wait, I'm going to add time to this thing, and we're going to do all this kind of cool stuff. Look, it works, and it has its place, and it's great. But don't forget that Houdini gives you all the nodes. There are so many nodes in there to do all kinds of different stuff, and they're adding more and more helper nodes almost with every release, especially the game dev / side effects labs guys really want to sort of make workflows faster and easier for people who are just stepping into the software for the first time. What I'm doing now is less and less of this and more of this. So there is a node called an attribute noise. So rather than having to write these sort of complicated statements, I can go, you know what, I want to randomize velocity, and I'm just going to go, there's defaults and they're fine. Then we're going to go and randomize my normals. I'm going to set a coverage angle and a zone angle. It's got this very sort of nice UI for doing things where you can sort of modify and fiddle stuff. And then we're going to do random colors based on periodic flow, which is animated with these values. It's very direct, and this won't scare other artists when you hand them a horrible 50-line vex tape and they go, what the hell does this do? User nodes, they're good. Less Python. People who start to get a bit of a technical bent with Maya, and they start to be sort of tempted by the siren song of Houdini, tend to go through a path of going, oh, I've got to solve this problem and that problem inside Maya, I better learn Python. And they tend to get pretty cluey with Python, and when they jump into Houdini, the first instinct is to Python all the things. Resist that temptation. A lot of the sort of stuff you're trying to Python your way out of inside Maya is to automate processes. You know, you're trying to put down 50 nulls and name them all the right way, parent them all up. You're trying to refer to this mesh, rename it, do the thing. Houdini, you tend to do less of that. It's perfectly capable of doing it. So Houdini actually has pretty reasonable Python support. So if you want to do something that you might do a lot in Maya, where you're trying to rename nodes, or you're trying to set properties on things when you first start out, Houdini's got a pretty powerful Python shell. So I can drag and drop nodes in here, and you get it filled out. So I could assign that reference to a thing. So I could say like s is equal to, and then drag and drop that in. Then I can do introspection on that thing, so I can see what can I do with that. There's a ton of things. I could do s.palm dot something. So you can do stuff. I can't see it now, and I've lost interest. If you do pipeline, eventually you do have to get into all this stuff because you want to make tools easier for artists and things. But definitely when you're first starting out and you're just dabbling, you don't need the Python side at all. You can leave it for later. How many left? Oh, not many, even there. Pretty have time. Oh, pretty good. Copy stamping, don't do it. A lot of older tutorials for Houdini use copy stamping. So copy stamping would be this kind of thing where, say, I want to copy a sphere onto every point of this grid, but I want them to have different sizes. So I go, okay, well, I'm going to take my grid, I'm going to attribute randomize, remember that? A thing called scale, which varies between 0.2 and 1, and then I'm going to copy spheres onto it. But before I do that, I've got to say, with the old copy sop, I've got to stamp the inputs, I've got to tell it what the name of this thing is, and then up on my sphere, I've got to set an expression on the uniform scale that says stamp, refer back to this node, grab that thing, and if you don't find it, use a value of 0. It's ridiculous. Houdini, once you get into it, has a really clean top-to-bottom workflow. Copy stamping was this abomination where things are going sort of against the grain, think like data is flowing upwards rather than downwards. And I hate scripts so much. And it's slow. This is the way it's kind of done now, where you have a grid. I'm going to randomize one of the known Houdini attributes. So there is a handful which you learn. So there's a p-scale, n, orient, a bunch of others. that when the copy swap sees those, when the modern copy swap sees those, it knows, oh, okay, I know what you want to do. So if you have p-scale, it knows then to take whatever geo you're feeding it, and it will scale them. This is data flowing top to bottom. It's really clean. It's very fast. Do it this way. Don't do any copy stamping, unless you need to. There are occasions where you absolutely have to, but almost inevitably there are better ways of doing it. Don't do copy stamping. Crashes, yeah. It's amazing that every sort of new user who comes in from Maya to Houdini has a gift, like this sort of horse whisperer touch to make Houdini crash every 20 minutes. I don't know what they do. And weirdly, if they are near someone who knows Houdini, as soon as they get within a 5-minute radius, it just stops. And Houdini behaves beautifully, then they walk away again and it crashes like you wouldn't believe. That happens. So it's probably about a month, I reckon, on average, of you just crashing it relentlessly, mercilessly. But then after a month, it starts to calm down. And what happens is it's you. I'm sorry, but it's you. You idiot users. You're doing something. You are clicking it in a way it doesn't like to be clicked. You're doing some sort of silly drag drop operation. Once you start to get a handle on how to treat Houdini, it's like sort of, you know, a temperamental horse. Whoa, calm down, shh, and it starts to kind of breathe and starts to whinny less, and it's eating hay. It's actually pretty stable and pretty powerful. You know, like, and then sort of the next level up from there is when things go wrong and you start to go, hang on, I think this is Houdini being weird, and that's a nice proud level up. They realize, hey, it wasn't me, it was it. Yeah, unfortunately for everyone coming in through from scratch, it is a bit of a teething process because you're trying to use it like it's Maya. It's not Maya. It'll never be Maya. Get yourself out of that mindset. You'll be happier. And lucky last, it's a really boring one, but it is handy. It's parameters versus attributes. Let's just go through the demo. So here I've got a curve, which I make into a nice sort of smoother curve. So it's got lots of points. And then I'm going to add another column of data here called width, which by default is all just the same because I've said just make this variable called width with this mystery thing I'm going to explain later with a default value of 0.1. I then randomize it, so every point will have its own width, and then I polywire it. So what a polywire does is it'll generate a tube around a curve. It has this attribute up here called wire radius, so I can set the thickness. But what you can also do is I can type in $width. And what that does is that then reads the width property per point, and then it will make the thickness of the tube be that. Really powerful. There are a few little places like that where people will just sort of hand over a trick. Oh, here's how you do a polywire random width. Here's this cool expression for using a transform node with $CX, $CY, or whatever it is. And people coming in from other software go, oh, great. So I can use a $width inside like a poly extrude or inside a blah, 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 and they look at it in absolute confusion, and no, you can't. There are actually very specific places where you can do these tricks. Did I keep the thing up? Yeah, I did. So if we go to the polywire help, it has this almost throwaway one-liner saying, the four numerical parameters support $width, $segs, div, lage, gen, and arc. Doesn't explain really what they do. They're just kind of there. Other nodes, other sort of older nodes within Houdini support similar kind of syntax. And people will then ask, okay, great. Is there a way to know? You know, how can you tell ahead of time what you can use? There is no way. You just have to ask your local friendly Houdini person, or you trawl the help and find it doesn't actually really tell you. Generally speaking, this sort of stuff is kind of going away anyway. Probably a more useful one. So what? Oh, does it? There you go. Don't use that either. It's terrible. What you kind of want is more of, there are nodes where they will kind of specify very, very clearly what it does. So if I put down a grid, whoop, that's not a grid. So there's a grid, and I'm going to do an attribute randomize. But this time I'm going to do it on the primitives, and I'm going to call it z-scale. And I'm going to make it a single value. So if I go up to here, you can see I've got this z-scale. What? Z-scale. Nope. Try again. Okay. So now I've got this z-scale attribute, which is randomized per polygon. Then if I put down a poly extrude, so I can extrude these guys up. But then over here under local control, you've got this thing called a distance scale, where if I do that and make sure it's running on individual things, this node is now this node is aware that if it finds this z-scale attribute, it'll then change the extrude height per polygon, per primitive. Again, not easily discovered in the help or just if you're a solo person. A lot of the stuff is in this sort of, I guess, passed down from master to student-y vibe, it's like, whispers and secret handshakes in the back rooms. Generally speaking, the best way to find out about these kind of things is to ask the right questions, and working out the way to ask those questions is really tricky if you're coming in from another package. If you talk in terms of sort of Maya speak, or if you talk in sort of vague analogies, it's really hard for people who've used Houdini for a bit to understand what the hell you're after. But once you sort of hang out on odd force for a bit, on side effects forums for a bit, and a few discords, you start to pick up the lingo. And so if you say, hey, I want to extrude a bunch of prims, but I want to randomize height per prim, people say, aha, you want poly extrude, local control with the distance scale enabled. That's the really dull end of my talk. Any questions on anything that I've shown there? Yeah. Sorry, Mike.
Hey, how's it going?
Hey, good, thank you. How are you?
Good, thanks.
Good.
So, a quick question about I think you're talking about expressions, the second last one, or the second one about attributes, etc. I've noticed that some tutorials that I've watched, they like to type in exactly what you're talking about, like the expressions. Correct me if I'm wrong, or if I heard wrong. Is that going to be going away, or is that staying?
It'll stay for the foreseeable future. Okay. I mean, I don't speak for side effects, but
yeah.
The H-script stuff kind of dates way back to Houdini version 1, or even I think sort of pre-Houdini. While they've sort of known for a while that it's getting a little bit cruddy and it needs to be replaced with something else, it's so built into the core of Houdini, it's very hard to take out. Generally, though, there are sort of vexy methods for most things that are kind of better alternatives to using H-script. Not always, like even fundamental ones like say using channel referencing between objects or doing stuff. H-script is still the fastest way, but oftentimes it's just asking someone who knows, and they'll go, actually, try this way instead.
Yep. So would you recommend sticking to something like an attribute wrangle?
Yeah.
Rather than that, because it looks like it's gonna, if you get more complex with that, it'll be hard to follow, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it's for the kind of stuff that people want to do inside Houdini. Oftentimes, Vex is one of the faster ways to get you from A to B. But when you're beginning, I'd probably even suggest don't even do that. Like stick with just the regular Houdini SOP nodes first. Once you get sort of comfortable with that, then you can dive down into using point VOPs because it's still node-based, but you're doing more low-level manipulations to your geometry, and you get that whole sort of like Vexy style, fast, multi-threaded speed. And then once you get really frustrated with VOPs because it's so node fiddly, you can start porting some of those ideas into Vex.
Okay.
And then you win.
Cool. Thanks.
That's right. Any other heckles?
Or questions?
I'm a bit of a newbie for Houdini, but I come from Softimage.
Yep.
I'm doing some medical animation, and I've got about 20 objects in the scene, a character rig, I've got simulation, I've got vellum. When I'm animating and jumping around, I'm jumping around all these trees. What's the best way to set that up?
So it's that what I was kind of mentioning before in terms of don't feel you have to abandon everything and dive into here and go, oh my God, I'm trying to, if only I was using Softimage still to do this thing. If that's the fastest way to do it, that's great. The thing about what I was referencing before in terms of that sort of outline a parent-child hierarchy of nodes versus just a big kind of poly soup of all the bits in together.
That made sense.
Yeah,
I should have done that. I should have done that.
Yeah, that's generally how it gets approached by most Houdini people, where you just try and sort of bring everything in. So you just have this huge spreadsheet, hundreds of thousands of points that have interesting attributes on them. So generally speaking, if you're using Alembic as an interchange format, or now that we're moving into USD, you get properties about where this thing came from. Names of objects, poly counts, velocities, all that kind of jazz. And again, it's a thing you just start thinking, okay, well, if I wanted to split out this from this to do a thing, what properties of the data living on the geometry can I use to get to where I want it to be? Again, sort of doing it from sort of first principles by yourself solo, really hard, because there's just, there is always a slightly sort of topsy-turvy way of thinking about data within Houdini, where, especially people who have been using it for a bit, they're thinking of it always in terms of, performance. You're thinking of like the most efficient way to use vex, vops, all the nodes to do what you need it to do. That may not be the most sort of intuitive for a human way of doing it. I would pretty much just ask that on a forum and just say, it's also a really good tip for, I think, my people as well, is work out a way. For some reason, the Maya online community doesn't really have this sort of caring, sharing vibe, where people are just handing around Maya scenes and saying, hey, here's an example, do a thing. Whereas in Houdini, it's rife. People are always aggressively trying to show that they're the smartest kid in the room. And so if you can take the problem you've got, reduce it down to a fairly simple HIP file and post it on a forum or on a Discord or on a wherever and say, hey, this is kind of where I got to, how would I fix it? And if you can state the question really clearly, you'll get 10 people chomping at the bit to say, I've solved it in 10 nodes. And the next person says, I solved it in 5 nodes. And the next person says, I solved it in 1 node, ha ha ha, and they win. And that's how I learnt. I got into this weird sort of self-harming spiral of I was spending all my waking hours sitting on Oddforce waiting for people to ask questions so I could download their scene, have a play at trying to solve it, and not to post back because I knew my answers would be terrible. But after about 2 or 3 months, I started to go, actually, this is a useful solution. I'll post it back, and then Thomas Slankick would always do a better answer than me, every time.
Lightwave used to be the same. I studied Lightwave,
right.
and Lightwave community was the same thing. It was just, everyone just wanted to show that they were the greatest.
Yeah, everyone wants to be smart.
It's true. Thanks, Vic.
Anyone else?
Next, I think somebody over here.
Over there?
Over here.
Hey mate, so just get into Houdini and considering how it HDAs and game dev nodes work or could be or should be used in Unity.
Oh yeah.
So it's a pretty broad question, but I suppose it's your experience of some do's and don'ts or some stay away from those, do not use.
No, I mean, I personally don't have much experience with it. My students have been doing some pretty cool things. And all of the examples I've seen online look absolutely amazing. And I think it's that thing of a lot of the stuff I'm seeing, which looks really interesting lately, is kind of solutions to problems I didn't even know existed. So like there was the one recently that was posted by Side Effects of the box generator, and I see like a lot of those kind of things. Oh, here's like a tree generator, and here's a rock generator. So, rocks are easy to find. I don't need any more rocks. But that one that actually is a very art directable, clean way to make as many random cipher boxes as you wanted. I thought that's so clever. And then I think the same guy did a further extension to doing kind of sci-fi panels, but again, not just the regular, very procedurally looking cheap sci-fi panel, but it had pipes in it and little cutouts, and you could control it through Photoshop. It was such an elegant solution to a problem I didn't even know existed. And I mean, again, Chris could probably answer that more than I could. Yeah, but also just that I think it's not like it's a sort of esoteric part of Houdini. I mean, it's being used by a lot of big studios and small studios and indies. I mean, it's it's a viable tool. So yeah, I wouldn't shy away from it at all. I'd dive in.
Cool.
Yeah, just a little plug for Simon Verstadt. That's who Matt was referencing. We commissioned Simon, and now we're working with him on a more regular basis to do Houdini and Unity workflows. Yeah.
And he's very smug.
Great guy.
Yeah.
Where? What are you pointing at?
Chap with the glasses, I thought had a question.
All right.
Oh, not that chap with the glasses.
Pass. I love the arrow that you've got there made out
thank
of
you.
nodes. I hesitate to ask you whether you considered using background images. I know that sometimes they don't quite line up very nicely.
Like this background image, and this is the first time I've actually used background images ever. Yeah, they work. They're kind of fun. I found they broke in a heartbeat if I moved it from between machines.
Yeah.
So if there was, I might have to put in some RFEs if they can be actually embedded in the HIP file. But yeah, they're fun.
Yeah, I've seen them used for rigs where you can sort of, but they don't necessarily live. After a while, they don't line up.
Yeah.
Other questions?
Thanks a lot. Great talk. Coming from a complete noob, what is the sort of area do you think that has the easiest learning curve? So is it procedural modeling? Is it effects? That sort of thing?
Yep. Just SOPs first, because that just informs everything else. And even I think sort of the way the simulation tools are heading more and more, like say this thing here, where you're actually doing a lot of manipulation in SOPs, like doing procedural modeling first up here before you do your tiny bit of sim work, and then you get out of that as soon as you can, and then do more procedural modeling work on that. There is a directness to how SOPs work, where it's the stuff that you kind of learn in terms of my construction history and other sort of apps where you have like modifier stacks, and they all claim to work in that way, and it's fine. But this is one of the few tools where you can actually see it. You can see the flow of data from top to bottom, and you can change the order around, and you can branch off here as an experiment and pull it back in. It's so fluid and fast. Whereas Sims, you can get a little bit caught up with, oh, is my volume resolution correct? Oh, do I have to rewind to frame blahs? It's just a little bit that can sort of muddy the waters of your learning. So yeah, definitely SOP modeling first.
Any other questions?
It's a very quiet room and no one's talking.
Need more beer.
Oh, one more question?
Yeah.
Hi, Matt.
Hey.
How you doing? Do you love the kind of new output thing where you can sort of see the different outputs? Or do you kind of find it really confusing?
I have come to accept it as the way things are done now. Like this whole 3 in, 3 out thing, I railed against that. I really didn't like it when I first used it, but it's now that I'm sort of using it more and more, it's beginning to make more sense to me. So I think, because I suppose it's worth explaining for people who...
But you can see the different outputs, right? If you, with there's that sneaky display thing.
Yeah. So if you do that thing of,
It's very sneaky.
and then go that to that, there we are. Oh, and I've crashed my thing. Oh my God, what have I done? Abort. No, exactly. So if I go to this guy, here you are. So I can go to that guy and go, show me the construct geometry. Yeah, there you go. It's a brave new world. Although that's also broken as well. Everything's broken. Hooray. This demo's over. Okay. That's right, you can too. Look at that. Yeah, it's so the way this stuff kind of used to be done, which you know, Louis, and most of the other old farts in the room, is you would have everything flowing through on a single kind of node stream, and inside you'll be using kind of the stuff that I showed before, where you'd have extra columns to say this stuff is the main geometry, this stuff is the constraints, this stuff is the something else. And if you had to do work on stuff, you would have to then split out that thing, do stuff, merge it back in. I always liked that. I thought it made it very clear as to the order of operations you're doing. This kind of jazz free form, all the nodes all the time, Y is here, Y is there. It's, yeah, I get it. I get why they're doing it. Doesn't mean I have to like it. But that's definitely a battle which is lost. So I'm just learning to begrudgingly accept it while muttering on stage while it's being recorded by side effects and being posted on their website. Yeah. Yeah. No. Sorry? Quick marks? No, I don't. And I think that also comes down to that thing of I like this. I like zooming out, getting a sense of the world, and then zooming back into where I am. That helps me understand where I am. Whereas with quick marks, I think I don't know, for some reason that keyboard shortcut thing never quite gelled in my brain. But yeah, the zooming out, getting the world view digs. Maybe if I was using more separate context generally in my work, that'd be more useful. But
I use it is a lot of people like having shop as a network.
Right.
Instead of, so you can't just go, oh, I'm making first shots, I make that like a quick. Oh, sorry.
He doesn't need a microphone.
Just if anyone wants to know what I was blathering about.
Even Nick DeBoer does not need a microphone.
No, I guess when I work as a freelancer, so I can kind of just decide my own workflows. Most of the time I just have everything under mat or shop for my shop networks or materials. But some professionals who work in studios like to have that in its own context. So it's a little harder to access. You have to I've got to go back and I've got to double click on this. But I find the quick marks. Quick masks. Yeah. Then you can just press a number, you just go 2 and it just takes you there. So it's got its place, especially I think if you are forced into a setup that's got tons of stuff in it, I think it makes sense.
Fine, I will learn the quick marks thing.
Yeah, no, I've used it once.
If you're a Maya artist, you've heard, I really want to learn Houdini. It's something I should probably learn. Everyone's telling me I should learn it. Where should I go first? What's the first thing I should do?
Let me think.
What's the first 3 things I should do?
If only I had actual internet access, I'd pull up my site as a massive plug. But again, this is thanks to Madeb and the other lovely folk at Animal, where when I was first learning Houdini, coming from a long time of using Maya, and they were going through this whole sort of Karate Kid, wax on, wax off, paint the pens thing, and I was learning so many things so quickly that I had to write it down, otherwise I would forget them straight away. So I put them on a website. It's called SIGGRAPH Asia. For better or worse, it's a little insight into my brain. But there's loads of examples and animated GIFs, and people seem to dig it and find that's one of the many ways that you can get into Houdini. Some people hate reading. That's perfectly understandable. There's loads of video stuff out there, loads of books and stuff. But yeah, if you like reading and GIFs, then SIGGRAPH. Thank you, Chris, for the plug.
Any other questions? Going once? Going twice?
Please no more questions so I can drink.
All right, well, thanks a lot, Matt.
Hey, thanks.
Next up.